Hello, everyone. The CPI inflation report was released, and the US government is reporting that inflation has dropped substantially. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this does not mean that prices are coming down. No, they're just saying that prices are not rising as quickly as before. The CPI inflation report shows that the rate of inflation is now at 2.7%, and that came in much lower than analysts were expecting. Now, in the previous report, it was at 3.0%. And economists were expecting it to increase to 3.1%. But the results defied expectations. Now, here's what the report shows. CPI headline inflation came in at core inflation, which takes out food and energy prices, came in at 26%. So, as you can see from the chart, the rate of inflation has come down compared to 2021 and 2022. However, it's been 5 years and they still cannot get the rate of inflation down to their goal of 20. I mean, just look at how sticky it's been over the past few years. Now, I just want you to keep in mind that we were at last reports, which is 50% above target. And listen, I think it's a fair concern to ask if the Federal Reserve is serious about bringing down inflation to their goal, because the Federal Reserve has been cutting interest rates, which is, of course, inflationary. And not only that, the Federal Reserve has turned the money printers back on. It happened on December 12th. We're starting off with printing $40 billion a month. And of course, that's inflationary as well. So my opinion is that they're just not serious about bringing inflation down, at least to a target of, I mean, you can let me know what you think, but if you're going to ask me, I believe that they're more concerned about propping up the markets, throwing a lifeline to the banks, and monetizing our national debt. I mean, how can you make the argument that they're serious about fighting inflation when the rate of inflation is above target and they're cutting interest rates and printing money? I mean, that doesn't seem too serious to me, but I want to tell you what their argument is. I mean, this is, I guess you could see this as their excuses. So Jay Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve, says that the tariffs have been pushing up the rate of inflation. However, Powell says the tariff inflation is most likely to be, and I quote, a one-time price increase. So in other words, Paul is saying that the rate of inflation has been elevated in 2025 by tariffs, but he expects things to get better. Another thing is that the Federal Reserve is saying that they're confident that inflation is going to cool in the upcoming months, and they're saying that inflation should not be a problem going forward. So the Federal Reserve said that they're concerned about the labor markets, and therefore they've been cutting interest rates and printing money. So that is their belief. Now, I want to show you how the CPI inflation report has affected the odds of an interest rate cuts at the next Federal Reserve meeting. The next Federal Reserve meeting is going to take place on January 12th, release of the CPI inflation reports. There was a 24.4% chance that the Federal Reserve would cut interest rates at that January meeting. Now, you have to remember that if inflation came in higher than expectations, then it would be more likely that the Federal Reserve could not cut interest rates in January. But the rate of inflation defied expectations and came in much lower than expected, right? So let's see how this affected the odds. And this is according to the CME Fed Watch tool. After the better than expected results of the CPI inflation reports, the odds of a rate cut in January increased from 20. Therefore, it barely moved, which is, honestly surprising given that the expectation was that inflation would come in at 3.1%, but it was at 2.7%. So I just want you to know that even though the results came in much better than expectations, the odds are still highly against an interest rate cut in January. And I do want to remind everyone that the Federal Reserve gave their projection, and they projected that they're only going to cut interest rates one time in all of 2026, and just by 0.25%. However, you have to remember that that's what Jay Powell at the helm of the Federal Reserve. However, Jay Powell is going to be out of there in May, and Trump says that he's going to nominate the new Fed chair, who's going to be Powell's replacements in the next few weeks. And that new Fed chair is going to be someone that believes in much lower interest rates. So one of the top three candidates is Christopher Waller, who's already a Federal Reserve governor. And he's saying that interest rates should be lower by a full one, that he would want to take it down to 2. But I want you to know that right now, Christopher Waller being the nominee is a long shot. Like if you go to the betting sites, the odds of him being the nominee is around. But honestly, I'll tell you that I got my money on him, even though it's a long shot, but it's a small bet. So the reason why I'm saying this is because Waller is already a voting member of the Federal Reserve. So he's already in there. He knows how things work. He wants lower interest rates. He's pushing for crypto adoption, and he gives an appearance of the Federal Reserve still remaining independent. Now, the leading candidates, according to the odd sites, is Kevin Hassett. Hassett would be the candidate that would lower interest rates the most, much more than Waller. And Hassett, the truth is that Hassett would do anything that President Trump says. However, that's actually a problem because the Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent of the US governments. Another problem is that Trump officials have been saying that Hassett really doesn't know what he's doing. So they're calling Hassett just a messenger. He's not known for his problem-solving abilities. And it would be dangerous to give him control of monetary policy for the United States of America. And even if Hassett were to be the nominee, the Senate could still reject him. And also another thing is that Hassett would have to convince the other voting members of the Federal Reserve to go along with his plans. Now, the second leading candidate is Kevin Warsh. Now, I want you to keep in mind that all of these top three candidates want lower interest rates, which is why President Trump is even considering these three candidates in the first place. However, I'll tell you that I don't know about Warsh because although he's been a part of the Federal Reserve in the past, he's kind of been doing nothing for the past 10 plus years. He's been doing some lecture work. He's an advisor to the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, which nobody really cares about, and on the board of directors for a few companies. But you know that the board really doesn't do much. Anyways, who's the next federal chair nominee going to be? I don't know who it's going to be. However, it's going to be someone that lowers interest rates substantially, much more than Powell wants. And in my opinion, it's going to make the inflation situation worse. So I'm just saying, get ready for that in 2026. Now, I want to conclude with this. The CPI inflation report says that the rate of inflation is at twinked, right? However, it's not just me. Like I'm telling you, we all know that that is a wild fantasy. It's hard to believe that when the money supply has been growing at a rate of 6%, it is my belief that the US government understates the rate of inflation to essentially underpay people that rely on the cost of living adjustments. So, for example, like the 70 million Americans that receive Social Security benefits, I just want you to think about it. Like, could you imagine how expensive it would be for the government to pay the correct amount for cost of living adjustments to 70 million Social Security recipients, like a 6% or 8% or 10% raise each year? You know, of course, that would be expensive and the government's broke right now. So what does the government do? They say that the rate of inflation is at have to give a 2.7% pay raise. Like, it's very straightforward, like if you ask me. So I just want to say this because I know that a lot of people are going to say that they don't believe what the government publishes at the rate of inflation. And, you know, I'm right there with you. So I just wanted to address that. All right. Let me know what you think about the situation. Please subscribe. Thank you for the support. And I wish you a very nice day. Take care.